So this is Drama 203, Section 1, and today I will be giving you my lecture on Oedipus the King by the great Greek playwright Sophocles. And we'll be working from the translation by Robert Fagles, which begins on page 177 of our text, the Norton Anthology of Drama, Volume 1. So please turn to that page now, and keep in mind that as I work through the play, I will be referencing the line numbers. Not the page numbers, but the line numbers. Well, before I begin my analysis of the play itself, I want to say a few things about Sophocles. He was born in 496 BCE, born in a village near Athens. He came from a prosperous family and served in many important government positions during his adult life, including as treasurer of Athens. He was elected to be one of the 9 generals who led the Athenian army in the Samian War between 440 and 439 BCE. Sophocles died in 406 BCE at the age of 90 years old. According to ancient sources, Sophocles began his playwriting career in 468 BCE, and he learned the art of writing tragedy from watching and reading the works of Aeschylus. Sophocles' earliest plays are said to have been written in Aeschylus's highly metaphorical style. Sophocles ultimately wrote 123 plays. Unfortunately, only 7 of those plays survive. All the surviving plays come from the later part of his career when he developed his own distinctive style as a playwright. He won first prize for tragedy at the Dionysia Festival 24 times. According to the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who we'll be quoting a great deal in today's lecture, quoting from Aristotle's text, the Poetics, which is found on page 219 of our Norton Anthology. Well, according to Aristotle, Sophocles added a third speaking part to Greek drama, which allowed for heightened characterization as well as heightened plot complication. Aeschylus, who of course, as I mentioned last week, had added the second actor to Greek drama, Aeschylus in his final plays included a third actor, apparently following the lead of Sophocles, the younger playwright. Aristotle also notes that Sophocles was the first dramatist to add scene painting, skenographia, scene painting. The facade of the skene, remember the skene is the wooden structure at the back of the stage, the backdrop of the stage, and behind the orchestra, which is the main playing area. The facade of the skene was decorated with paintings that helped set the scene of the play. For example, a painting of trees would indicate action is taking place in the woods. So this too was an innovation by Sophocles, skenographia. Sophocles wrote Oedipus the King around 430 BCE, shortly after a plague, probably typhus, had struck Athens, killing perhaps 25% of the population, including Pericles, the leader of Athens' Democratic Party, and for most of the previous 2 decades, essentially the ruler of the city-state. So during this time of crisis, Sophocles wrote a play about another powerful city-state, Thebes, that is stricken by a plague of its own. Thebes, at the time, it's worth noting, was an enemy of Athens. Thebes was an ally of Athens' major rival, Sparta. The story of Oedipus was among the myths that Sophocles and others used as the material for their plays, stories that have been handed down from generation to generation through the oral tradition. As I said last week, Aeschylus didn't come up with the characters of Agamemnon, of Cassandra, of Clytemnestra. Aeschylus drew upon this wonderful collection of mythological tales that the Greeks so loved and tales that were so central to their culture. And such is the case with Sophocles in this play. It's very important to understand that most in the original audience in 430 BCE at the Dionysian Theater in Athens, most in the original audience would have known the circumstances of Oedipus's fall. In fact, Aeschylus had written a now lost play on the character of Oedipus some years before. Aristotle, writing about the craft of the tragic playwright, observed the following: he, the playwright, may not indeed destroy the framework of the received legends, but he ought to show of his own and skillfully handle the traditional material. That's what was expected of the tragic playwright in 5th century BCE. So the playwright was a creator, but also an adapter. So let's then turn to this play, Oedipus the King by Sophocles. As I go through the play, I'm going to point out the divisions in the story. Remember, I said in our very first lecture that every Greek tragedy is broken into episedia, episodes, and each episode presents a sequence of action between the characters. And each of those episodes is then followed by a stasimon, a choral ode performed by the chorus, 12 to 15 singer-dancers who are on stage throughout the entire play with the characters. So the first episode in Oedipus the King comprises lines 1 to 168 of our text, and that's followed by the first stasimon, which consists of lines 169 to 244. The three characters who speak in episode 1 are Oedipus himself, as well as the priest and Creon. So in this play, as in Agamemnon, the skein is meant to represent the palace, in this case, the palace of Thebes. The door of the skein is taken to be the door of the palace. And like Aeschylus, the earlier playwright, Sophocles makes brilliant theatrical use of the door of the skein, which is, as I say, meant to be the door of Oedipus's palace. At the center of the orchestra is the thigh mill. I mentioned the thigh mill in my first lecture. It was the altar of Dionysus. And here, the thigh mill is integrated into the action of the play. Priests, only one of whom speaks, are carrying out rituals to the gods as the play begins, laying branches and wool on the thigh mill, on the altar. Oedipus is the first speaker, and he puts a question to his gathered people, addressing the lead priest. So this is at line number 9. Oedipus says, "Speak up, old man. Your years, your dignity, you should speak for the others. Why here and kneeling? What preys upon you so sudden, some sudden fear, some strong desire? You can trust me. I am ready to help. I'll do anything. I would be blind to misery, not to pity my people kneeling at my feet." Lines 9 to 15. So Oedipus is immediately established as a responsible leader. He is their king, and they are, in his words, quoting line number 1, his children. He will do anything to help them. In his response, the priest offers a harrowing description of plague. This is picking it up at line 31. "Thebes is dying," the priest says, "a blight of the fresh crops and the rich pastures. Cattle sicken and die, and the women die in labor, children stillborn. And the plague, the fiery god of fever, hurls down on the city, his lightning slashing through us. Raging plague in all its vengeance, devastating the house of Camdus." Camdus, in the mythology, was the founder of the city-state of Thebes. The priest continues, "And black death luxuriates in the raw, wailing miseries of Thebes." Line 31 to 38. So the priest's opening speech provides information about the immediate crisis facing Thebes, but it does more than that. As the speech continues, we learn about Oedipus's background, so far as the people of Thebes know about that background. Thus, this first lengthy speech by the priest of Zeus, who is addressing Oedipus, is another example of a very important dramatic device that I spoke about last day, exposition, the relation of prior matters, laying out the details that you need to understand if you are going to be able to follow the story that is unfolding in the drama. Exposition. Well, here's more exposition. That's picking it up at line 44. The priest declares to Oedipus, "You freed us from the Sphinx. You came to Thebes and cut us loose from the bloody tribute we had paid that harsh, brutal singer. We taught you nothing, no skill, no extra knowledge. Still you triumphed. A god was with you, so they say, and we believe it. You lifted up our lives." Now, moving ahead a few lines to line 58. The priest cries, "Act now, we beg you, best of men. Raise up our city." So Oedipus is here called the best of men. His people view him as a savior. He is both extremely intelligent and extremely brave. And he seems to have the gods on his side. He inspires confidence. The priest in the speech that I've just read refers to the time Oedipus saved Thebes by answering the riddle of the Sphinx, a demonic figure of destruction, often depicted as a winged lion with a woman's head. The Sphinx strangled anyone who could not answer her riddle. Later tradition held that the riddle was as follows: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? No one could answer this question until Oedipus came to the gates of Thebes. And when the Sphinx put the question to Oedipus, he paused. He thought for several hours. In some version of the story, he thought about this riddle for several days. Then he realized it's a metaphor. And his response was, man as a baby crawls on 4 legs. As an adult, 2 legs. When old, man uses a cane. So Oedipus's correct response, the story tells us, prompted the Sphinx to kill herself, thereby freeing the city of Thebes. In the present crisis, Oedipus has already taken action. Let's look at line 80. At line 80, he says, "After a painful search, I found one cure. I acted at once. I sent Creon, my wife's own brother, to Delphi, Apollo, the prophet's oracle, to learn what I might do or say to save our city." So this is very important, this reference to oracles. In ancient Greece, it was believed that the gods spoke through oracles. The oracle was a priest or priestess acting as a medium, usually in a state of trance. The most famous oracle in ancient Greek culture was the Delphic oracle, the origins of which date back to the 9th century BCE. Delphi is a city on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece. It was home to a temple dedicated to the god Apollo. Its oracle was called a Pythia, a priestess, chosen by the people of Delphi. The Pythia would speak what were taken by believers to be prophecies from the gods, and in particular, the god Apollo. The word oracle was also sometimes used, as it is in this play, to refer to the responses or messages given by the priestess. Well, the very day on which the play takes place, Creon is returning to Thebes from his mission to Delphi. The oracle's response to Creon is related at line 115. Murder sets the plague storm on the city. That's what the oracle of Delphi, through the medium of the Pythia, told Creon. Murder sets the plague storm on the city. Line 115. Oedipus, in hearing this declaration, demands at line 116, whose murder? Whose fate does Apollo bring to light? And Creon responds, our leader, my lord, was once a man named Laius, before you came and put us straight on course. So the plague will end once the murderer is revealed and punished. Oedipus asks at line 124, where on earth are they, the killers of King Laius? Where to find it now, the trail of ancient guilt so hard to trace? Creon answers, here in Thebes, he said. The he being here Apollo, speaking through the oracle. So Oedipus begins to collect the known facts of King Laius's death. He asks if there is a witness that he can, line 133, cross-examine. It's very interesting, the use of this phrase, cross-examine. It tips us off, I think, to the fact that this play is, in a way, the very first detective story. Its protagonist, its main character, is searching for clues and evidence to solve a murder. Episodes 2 through 5 of Sophocles' play really consist of a series of interrogations. Well, when Creon informs Oedipus that the people of Thebes gave up on finding Laius's murderer once the Sphinx arrived to terrorize the city, Oedipus makes a bold declaration. This is at line 150. Oedipus says, "I'll start again. I'll bring it all to light myself. Apollo is right, and so are you, Creon, to turn her attention back to the murdered man. Now you have me to fight for you. You'll see, I am the land's avenger by all rights, and Apollo's champion too." Picking it up at line 163, Oedipus proclaims, "I'll do everything." So we see here Oedipus's assertiveness and his self-possession, as well as his optimism. Now that he is taken charge of solving this murder, it will be solved, according to Oedipus. Notice he doesn't freak out. He doesn't try to downplay the crisis. He acts. His image of himself is as an agent of the good, as well as an agent of the gods. In the first staciment in this play, which begins at line 168, the chorus sings an invocation, that is, an address to the gods. The chorus calls for help from the key Olympian gods. You almost get a roll call of the gods in this staciment. First, Zeus at line 168 to line 171. Zeus, the ruler of Mount Olympus, the father of the Olympians, and the god of the sky and thunder. They next call on Apollo, Apollo, the god of music and poetry, the god of archery and the sun, as well as healing, and in some versions, the god of prophecy. That's lines 173 to 179. They next call on Athena, from which Athens, Greece takes its name. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, industry, and war. Those are lines 180 to 181. They next call on Artemis, goddess of the hunt, goddess of the wilderness, chastity, and childbirth, lines 181 to 183. And finally, they call on Dionysus, god of wine and vegetation, the patron of the theater. That's lines 189 to 190. So it's a roll call of the gods, a very powerful invocation of these key figures in ancient Greek religion. The chorus continues at line 203. The chorus says, "Death, so many deaths, numberless death on death, no end, Thebes is dying." The chorus sees Thebes as the victim of another god, the god named Ares, line 218, the god of death, that raging god of war. Except this time, the god of war doesn't come armored in bronze, line 220, but in the form of the fever, line 218. So let's then turn to episode 2 of this play. Episode 2, which comprises lines 245 to 526, which is followed by staciment number 2, lines 527 to 572. Well, episode 2 opens with Oedipus addressing his people who in this play are represented by the chorus. He demands that the murderer of King Laius, or anyone with knowledge of the murder, reveal themselves. In doing so, he affirms his role as the protector of Thebes. In the speech, he mentions a very important plot point. This is at line 295 to line 296. He mentions that he possesses his, King Laius's, bed and a wife who shares our seed. So This is a very important part of the story of Oedipus. After defeating the Sphinx, solving the riddle of the Sphinx and thereby freeing Thebes, Oedipus entered the city a hero, the champion of Thebes, the man who saved the city. And shortly thereafter, he married the widow of King Laius, the widow of King Laius, who is named Jocasta. Most of this episode, episode 2 of the play, is dedicated to the dialogue between Oedipus and Tiresias. Tiresias is a prophet, a seer, whom Oedipus has summoned. He addresses Tiresias, Oedipus does, at line 340. Let's just turn to line 340. He says, "O Tiresias, master of all the mysteries of our life, all you teach and all you dare not tell, signs in the heavens, signs that walk the earth." He is a prophet of the gods. So, I'll give you a quick backstory of this fascinating figure of Tiresias, one of the most intriguing of all figures in Greek mythology. He turns up in a number of Greek dramas, including the one we'll be looking at next week, Antigone, also by Sophocles. Well, in his youth, Tiresias was turned into a female after striking a pair of copulating snakes with his staff. He struck the same pair of snakes 7 years later and was turned back into a male. A couple decades go by, and Zeus, the king of the gods, Hera, his queen, are having one of their famous arguments. This time they're arguing over whether men or women enjoy sex more. And so they consult Tiresias. Tiresias tells them women experience 9 or 10 times the satisfaction. And so Hera, angry, blinded him. Zeus, on the other hand, feeling sorry for Tiresias, gave him the gifts of prophecy and long life. And so centuries pass, and we come to the day that Tiresias enters the gates of Thebes, summoned by Oedipus. Oedipus wants to know, Tiresias, can you solve this murder? Can you give us information that will lead us to the murder of King Laius? Because only when we find out who the murderer of King Laius is, and we either exile or execute that murderer, only then will the plague in Thebes end. Well, in this play, Tiresias knows the truth of Laius's murder. But in this case, the truth for him is a burden. Let's turn to line 359 and the words of Tiresias. He says, "How terrible to see the truth, when the truth is only pain to him who sees. I knew it well, but I put it from my mind, else I never would have come." Picking it up at line 364, he says to King Oedipus, "Just send me home. You bear your burdens, I'll bear mine. It's better that way, please believe me." The exchange that follows between Oedipus and Tiresias, the king and the prophet, is one of misinterpretation and of escalating anger. It's one of the most compelling scenes in the play, the type of scene of which Sophocles is a master. When Tiresias says that he knows who Laius's murderer is, but won't reveal the murderer's name, Oedipus falls into a rage, calling the prophet a traitor to the Theban people and to all of Greece. He calls the prophet, line 381, the scum of the earth. This might be considered as evidence that Oedipus is bad-tempered. Although, as he says to Tiresias, this is line 386, who could restrain his anger hearing you? Oedipus, after all, needs to know the answer of who the murderer is, if he is to end the plague that is ravaging his people. Well, while Oedipus's anger may indeed be justified, he does jump to the wrong conclusion when at line 394 he insists, "Now I see it all," he says to Tiresias. "You helped hatch the plot to kill King Laius. You did the work, yes, short of killing him with your own hands." So he accuses, this is very serious, he accuses Tiresias, Apollo's prophet, of being an accessory to the murder of a king. Tiresias, now enraged himself, declares to Oedipus, this is line 401, you are the curse, the corruption of the land. A few lines later, line 413, Tiresias exclaims to Oedipus, you are the murderer you hunt. You are the murderer you hunt. Oedipus again draws the wrong conclusion and again thinks the worst of his allies, deciding that Tiresias and Creon, Oedipus's own brother-in-law, are conspiring against him in order for Creon to overthrow Oedipus and take the Theban crown for his own. That's lines 437 to 441. Oedipus makes these accusations against Tiresias and the absent Creon. Well, once Oedipus denounces Tiresias further, calling him at line 440 a scheming quack, at line 443 a pious fraud, the indignant Tiresias fires back. Here I'm looking at line 468. So you mock me with my blindness, he says to Oedipus. Let me tell you this, you with your precious eyes, you're blind to the corruption of your life, to the house you live in, those you live with. Who are your parents? Do you know? Lines 468 to 473. He asks the question that now cannot be unasked. Who are your parents? Do you know? So this is a play in part about literal and metaphorical blindness. Tiresias, who is literally blind, is saying that Oedipus is metaphorically blind, blind to the truth about himself. Tiresias has revealed, or rather partially revealed, the dreadful secret that, for the sake of Oedipus, he had earlier said he would never disclose. Tiresias exits the stage, but not before stating those secrets again in the form of a riddle. Let's turn to line 520. At line 520, he says to Oedipus and to the assembled chorus representing the Theban people, revealed at last, brother and father both, to the children he embraces, to his mother, son and husband both. He sowed the loins his father sowed. He spilled his father's blood. Go in and reflect on that. Solve that. You're such a master at solving riddles. Solve this riddle, Oedipus. And if you find I've lied, from this day onward, call the prophet blind. Lines 520 to 526. Well, in the tension-building second stasima that follows episode 2 of this play, the chorus is left reeling after Tiresias's opaque accusations. Let's look at line 550. The chorus sings, the skilled prophet scans the birds and shatters me with terror. Shatters me with terror. I can't accept him, can't deny him, don't know what to say. I'm lost. And the wings of dark foreboding beating, I cannot see what's to come, what's still to come. Lines 550 to 553. And remember I quoted Bernard Knox in my very first lecture on Greek tragedy, and he made the very astute point that the chorus on stage represents the community. It is as if the audience were in some way on stage partaking in the unfolding of the story. And that's very evident here in the second stasim in Oedipus the King. So the chorus is reeling. They don't know what to think of these accusations, these comments uttered by Tiresias, who prior to this has been a faithful servant of Apollo, someone they trusted. Nevertheless, in a very moving passage, I think, the chorus resolves to remain loyal to their king. This is picking it up at line 567. The chorus sings, no, not till I see these charges proved will I side with his accusers. We saw him then, when the she-hawk, that is the Sphinx, swept against him, saw with our own eyes his skills, his brilliant triumph. There was the test. He was the joy of Thebes. Never will I convict my king, never in my heart. Lines 567 to 572. Tiresias knows the truth, as did most of the original audience members watching this play in its first performance in 530 BCE at the Dionysa Theater. It's in the next 3 episodes of this play where Oedipus finds out that truth for himself. Well, then let's turn to episode number 3. It's the longest episode in this play. It stretches from lines 572 to 953, and it's followed by a staciment that covers lines 954 to 997. So this episode, as well as the next one, showcase Sophocles' skill with characterization. I think we all know what I mean by characterization. How the writer describes, presents the fictional characters in the story. Characterization. And Sophocles, from the time he wrote these plays until now, has been regarded as one of the masters of characterization. As episode 3 begins, the conflict between Oedipus and Creon, his brother-in-law, continues. Creon says his reputation is in ruins, line 579, because of these accusations hurled by his brother-in-law Oedipus, which Creon insists are untrue. Oedipus had said in the previous episode that I know, Tiresias, why you're saying these lies. You're conspiring with Creon, and together you want to take the crown from me. Creon, in episode 3, tells his brother-in-law, you've lost your sense of balance, line 616. In this dialogue, we learn much about the kind of person Creon is. Unlike Oedipus, who accepts all the responsibilities that go with his power, and who puts the interest of his people above his own, Creon prefers to have power without responsibility. And this is expressed in Creon's speech. Let's just turn to line 653. That's midway through this speech where Creon is denying the charges that Oedipus has lodged against him, that Creon is a conspirator who wants the crown. Line 653, Creon says, look at it this way first. Who in his right mind would rather rule and live in anxiety than sleep in peace? Particularly if he enjoys the same authority. Moving a couple lines deeper into the speech, line 663, how could kingship please me more than influence, power without a qualm? I'm not that deluded yet to reach for anything but privilege outright, profit free and clear. So Creon goes on to say that he sees things clearly. Creon is no idealist. In fact, he strikes us as rather cynical. In some ways, he's the opposite of King Oedipus. Oedipus, who is always operating in the interests of his people. Oedipus, who's ready to make a sacrifice for the people of Thebes. Well, Oedipus, at this point, still very angry, still almost paranoid about these accusations made against him, says he wants Creon dead, line 699. And Creon calls Oedipus, at line 701, insane. It's at this point that Jocasta enters the stage through the scheme door and tries to reconcile husband and brothers. This is the introduction of this key character in the story, Jocasta, the wife of Oedipus, the widow of the previous king, King Laius, and the sister of Creon. Well, in the exchange that follows, Oedipus finally backs down when the chorus, the people of Thebes, intercedes on Creon's behalf. These are lines 741 to 745. So Creon exits the stage. Oedipus says, I won't take action against you now, but I still suspect you of trying to take my crown. So with Creon gone, husband and wife, Oedipus and Jocasta, discuss Tiresias's shocking statements, the statements made in the previous episode. In doing so, Jocasta shares her view on prophecies and oracles. In short, she doesn't believe in them. Let's look at line 780. At line 780, she says, listen to me, husband, and learn some peace of mind. No skill in the world, nothing can penetrate the future. The reason she's come to this view is that an oracle once claimed her late husband, King Laius, would die, line 787, at the hands of his son. However, King Laius ultimately died at the hands of in Jocasta's words at line 790, thieves at a place where three roads meet. She reveals that she and her husband did have a baby, but that baby, continuing at line 790, wasn't 3 days old, and the boy's father fastened his ankle, had a henchman fling him away on a barren, trackless mountain. A very key revelation as this plot now becomes more and more complicated. I'll quote that again, line 790 to line 794. The baby that Jocasta and King Laius had wasn't 3 days old, and the boy's father fastened his ankle, had a henchman fling him away on a barren, trackless mountain. Jocasta's account of Laius, and in particular Laius's murder, conjures up in Oedipus a memory of his own. After Jocasta confirms that Laius was reported dead shortly before Oedipus first entered the gates of Thebes, we learn more about Oedipus's origin story, this time from Oedipus himself. As he puts it at line 823, he now has a terrible fear that the blind seer can see. He goes on to relate to Jocasta his story, pointing out, and here's one of these beautiful, small character moments that I think make this play so great as it is. Line 849, before he tells his story, he points out, whom would I turn toward but you as I go through all this? She is the love of his life. She is his confidant. She is his partner. And so we come to this lengthy speech that begins at line 851, where Oedipus shares the story of his childhood and adolescence and the events that led to his entry into Thebes and into the life of Jocasta and Creon and the rest of the Theban people. So this is line 851. Read along with me. My father was Polybius, king of Corinth, my mother a Dorian, Merope, and I was held the prince of the realm among the people there, till something struck me out of nowhere, something strange, worth remarking perhaps, hardly worth the anxiety I gave it. Some man at a banquet, who had drunk too much, shouted out, he was far gone, mind you, that I am not my father's son. Fighting words, I barely restrained myself that day, but early the next I went to mother and father, questioned them closely, and they were enraged at the accusation and the fool who let it fly. So as for my parents, I was satisfied, but still this thing kept gnawing at me. The slander spread. I had to make my move, and so, unknown to mother and father, I set out for Delphi. So earlier in his life as a young man, Oedipus made the trip to Delphi and to the Delphic oracle. He continues, the god Apollo spurned me, sent me away, denied the facts I came for. But first he flashed before mine eyes a future great with pain, terror, disaster. I can hear him cry, you are fated to couple with your mother. You will bring a breed of children into the light no man can bear to see. You will kill your father, the one who gave you life. These are the words of the priestess at the Oracle of Delphi, speaking as a medium, the prophecy of the god Apollo. Well, Oedipus continues, I heard all that and ran. I abandoned Corinth. From that day on, I gauged its landfall only by the stars, running, always running, towards some place where I would never see the shame of all these oracles come true. And as I fled, I reached that very spot where the great king, you say, met his death. Now, Jocasta, I will tell you all. Making my way toward the triple crossroad, I began to see a herald, then a brace of colts, drawing a wagon and mounting on the bench a man, just as you've described him. She described in the lines before this what her late husband looked like, just as you've described him, coming face to face, and the one in the lead and the old man himself were about to thrust me off the road, brute force, and the one shouldering me aside, the driver, I strike him in anger. The old man watching me, coming up along his wheels, he brings down his prod, 2 prongs straight at my head. I paid him back with interest. Short work, by God, with one blow of the staff, In this right hand I knock him out of his high seat, roll him out of the wagon, sprawling headlong. I killed them all, every mother's son. Lines 851 to 897. So Oedipus didn't strike first, but he struck back. And as he remembers it, he killed them all. He now realizes that he is likely the killer of King Laius. But here at the midpoint of the play, Oedipus still has hope that he is innocent. It turns out that there was a lone survivor of the king's retinue from that day on the crossroads. And that survivor reported, line 932, that thieves, not one thief, but thieves, plural, thieves had killed the king and the others. That servant, now a shepherd in the hinterlands of Thebes, may be able to clear Oedipus from this crime. So in the stasimon that ends episode number 3, the chorus is torn, and this play is widely regarded as having among the greatest stasima to be found in any of the Greek tragedies. And I would say that stasimon number 3 is probably the best. So let's look at this stasimon. At the beginning of it, the chorus affirms the power of and their devotion to the deathless gods. They affirm the gods will humble the prideful. This is picking it up at line 972. Line 972. If any man, the chorus sings, comes striding high and mighty in all he says and does, no fear of justice, no reverence for the temples of the gods, let a rough doom tear him down, repay his pride, breakneck, ruinous pride. So the chorus does not want to lose Oedipus, their great leader, but at the same time, the chorus doesn't want the prophecies of the oracle proven false. Look at lines 985 to 990. The chorus sings, "Never again will I go reverent to Delphi, the inviolate heart of earth." It was the center of the spiritual world of ancient Greece, Delphi. The inviolate heart of earth, or Apollo's ancient oracle at Abai, or Olympia of the fires. These are also sites of major temples in Greece, temples that honor the gods. And the chorus says, it will never visit any of these temples again unless these prophecies all come true for all mankind to point toward in wonder. Lines 985 to 990. So the chorus's faith in Oedipus is set against the chorus's faith in their gods. The chorus seems especially disturbed that Jocasta has denied the truth of the old oracles sent to Laius, line 994. The chorus says in the very next line, line 995, our masters, strike them, strike the gods off the rolls. In other words, Jocasta isn't showing proper reverence for the gods. It is a remarkable stasimon because you see that conflict within the chorus. Their faith in Oedipus on the one hand, the faith they have in their gods on the other hand. Well, then let's turn to episode 4. And episode 4 of the play comprises lines 998 to 1194. It's followed by stasimon number 4, lines 1195 to 1214. In episode 4, it's not the shepherd who arrives, but a messenger from Corinth, the Greek city-state where Oedipus grew up. He, the messenger, says to Jocasta that he brings what he calls, line 1022, wonderful news. And what is that wonderful news? Line 1029. The people there, the messenger reveals, they want to make your Oedipus king of Corinth, so they're saying now. We learn that King Polybus of Corinth has died, and so his son, Oedipus, has inherited the throne. Polybus's death of natural causes seemingly disproves the prophecy that Oedipus would kill his own father. Upon hearing the news, A relieved Oedipus says to his wife, this is at line 1062, all those prophecies I feared, Polybius packs them off to sleep with him in hell. They're nothing, worthless. And I should note that when he uses this reference to hell, he's talking about the underworld, the afterlife in ancient Greek religion, not the Christian hell. The underworld in ancient Greek religion was ruled by Hades, and sometimes the underworld itself was called Hades. Hades was Zeus's brother. So this is what he says. Polybius packs off all these prophecies to sleep with him in hell. They're nothing. They're worthless. And Jocasta agrees. Line 1069. Why should a man fear? It's all chance. Chance rules our lives. That's Jocasta's conclusion, given how things have unfolded here in the middle of this play and the revelations that have occurred. Well, Oedipus hasn't entirely given up belief in the oracles, though, and declares at line 1081 that he will live in fear as long as Polybus's wife, Merope, who Oedipus believes is his mother, is still alive. And that's because, of course, the Delphic oracle did prophesize that Oedipus would, line 1091, make love with his own mother. Then, from the messenger, they learn a startling fact. Polybus and Merope adopted Oedipus. They aren't his birth parents. Decades earlier, the messenger, in his earlier life as a shepherd, crossed paths on Mount Cithaeron with another shepherd. And that other shepherd was carrying a baby whose ankles were pinned together. Line 1033. The messenger recalls that the shepherd identified himself as a servant of Laius. In fact, he's the same servant who survived the assault on Laius at the crossroads, the same servant who has been summoned to appear at the palace. By this point, and I love this moment because again, it shows us how skilled Sophocles is when it comes to characterization. We see here that Jocasta has figured out the truth. She's figured out the truth before her husband does. And she frantically pleads with Oedipus to drop the whole matter. This is at line 1057. That man, why ask? Old shepherd, don't summon that shepherd and ask these questions of what happened all those decades ago. Old shepherd talk, empty nonsense. Don't give it another thought. Don't even think. And Oedipus responds, what? Give up now? With a clue like this? Fail to solve the mystery of my birth? Not for all the world. Jocasta replies, stop. In the name of God, if you love your own life, call off the search. When he won't listen, she cries at line 1172, you're doomed. May you never fathom who you are. She runs from the stage through the palace doors, the doors of the scheme. Oedipus, once again, misinterprets the situation. He believes that Jocasta is afraid that it will be revealed that he, Oedipus, is actually the son of a slave, that he's low-born, a servant, line 1165. Well, when the chorus leader expresses his fear that something monstrous may come bursting forth in the silence that follows Jocasta's exit, Oedipus will not be dissuaded. Another very important speech, a character-building speech, occurs at line 1182, ending at line 1194. Let me read that speech for you right now. So we're at line 1182. Let it burst. Whatever will, whatever must, I must know my birth. No matter how common it may be, I must see my origins face to face. She, perhaps, she with her woman's pride, may well be mortified by my birth, but I count myself the son of chance, the great goddess, giver of all good things. I'll never see myself disgraced. She, the goddess of chance, is my mother, and the moons have marked me out, my blood brothers, one moon in the wane, the next moon great with power. That is my blood, my nature. I will never betray it, never fail to search and learn my birth. Lines 1182 to 1194. So you could argue very credibly that Oedipus is being prideful here, the pride that the chorus condemns in its third staciment. At the same time, and this is part of what makes this play so wonderful to revisit, you can come away from this play interpreting the characters in different ways. Because at the same time, you could argue that Oedipus is demonstrating in this speech and in his decisions in the middle part of this play the very traits that make him admirable, the traits that make him heroic. He is seeking the truth no matter what that truth might bring, and that takes courage. Yes, Oedipus is quick to anger. Creon calls him brutal in his rage. And yes, Oedipus jumps to the wrong conclusions several times, which the chorus warns against at line 692. But you can see why at this moment, why the Theban people love and respect him, why Oedipus is considered a legend in his own time, considered an exceptional figure, the best of men, as the chorus called him. Well, for the moment, the chorus believes in Oedipus again and believes that everything will work out. That's the faith they have in their leader. In the fourth staciment, they predict that once their king's true parentage is finally revealed, they will sing songs of praise, line 1201. Songs of praise to his apparent birthplace, Mount Cithaeron. They speculate even that he might be the son of a god, and they mention some possibilities, Pan, Apollo, Hermes, or even Dionysus. Well, then let's turn to episode number 5. It's a very short episode, but it is really the turning point in the entire play. And episode 5 consists of lines 1215 to line 1312, followed by a rather short staciment covering lines 1313 to 1352. So in episode 5, the Theban shepherd, who was once Laius's servant, arrives at the palace. Like Tiresias and Jocasta, the shepherd tries to stop Oedipus from pursuing the truth. But Oedipus, again, will not relent. And I think here at this moment in the play, this very crucial moment in the play, we have one of Oedipus's very best lines. It's line 1284. Oedipus says, "I'm at the edge of hearing horrors, yes, but I must hear. I must hear." And so he hears the truth. Under the threat of torture, the shepherd reveals that the child he took to Mount Cithaeron was, line 1283, from the house of Laius. Line 1287, his son, they said it was, his son, the son of King Laius. The shepherd was under orders to kill the infant, but instead he gave the child to the Corinthian shepherd that he encountered that day on Mount Cithaeron. Lines 1303 to 1307. "I pitied the little baby, master," the shepherd says. "Hoped he'd take him off to his own country." The first he being the shepherd from Corinth, the second he being the baby. Hoped he'd take him off to his own country, far away. But he, the shepherd I met that day on Mount Cithaeron, saved him, the baby, for this fate. If you are the man he says you are, believe me, you were born to pain. Lines 1303 to 1307. Charles Siegel, one of my favorite scholars of ancient Greek drama, wrote an amazing book in the early 1980s on Sophocles. Charles Siegel has pointed out that Sophocles tells the story of Oedipus almost entirely in reverse. Only in the second last episode do we learn the details of Oedipus's infancy. Going back to Aristotle for a moment. Aristotle was a great admirer of this play. If you've read the sections of the Poetics that are found in our Norton Anthology of Drama, you'll see that He mentions Oedipus the king numerous times. In the Poetics, Aristotle focuses on the key elements of what Aristotle makes for a proper tragic play. And one of those elements is called peripety. Peripety. Peripety is Greek for the reversal in the protagonist's fortunes. Another key element, according to Aristotle, in tragic playwriting is something called anagnoresis. Anagnoresis is where the protagonist comes to recognize the truth of their situation. So anagnoresis is the scene of recognition. Peripety, the scene of reversal. Anagnoresis, the scene of recognition. Aristotle points out, as he continues his read through Oedipus the King, that one of the most brilliant aspects of Sophocles' play is that the peripety and the anagnoresis are one and the same. The moment the shepherd reveals the truth of Oedipus's parentage is both Oedipus's peripety and his anagnoresis. It's the reversal of his fortunes and the moment of recognition when he finally understands his true situation and finally understands who he is. The Stasimon that comes after episode 5 reminds the audience of Oedipus's many great feats. Oedipus who, in the words of the chorus, outranged, line 1322. In other words, surpassed all men. The fall of Oedipus has left the chorus inconsolable. And I think, again, one of the most wonderful qualities of this play, as in Aeschylus's Agamemnon, the chorus, this group of characters, receive development of their own. They grow and change over the course of the play as they respond to the various shocking developments. And at this point in the story, the chorus is truly inconsolable. Lines 1346 to 1352. These key lines in the fifth Stasimon of this play. The chorus sings, "O child of Laius, would to God I'd never seen you, never, never. Now I weep like a man who walls the dead, and the dirge comes pouring forth with all my heart. I tell you the truth, you gave me life, my breath leapt up in you, and now you bring me down, now you bring down night upon my eyes." Lines 1346 to 1352, the fifth Stasima of the chorus in Oedipus the King. In the Poetics, Aristotle further argues that a scene of suffering is essential to any great tragedy. So you have the scene of reversal, you have the moment of recognition, peripety and agnoresis, and you also have the scene of suffering. Aristotle writes, "The scene of suffering is a destructive or painful action, such as death on the stage, bodily agony, wounds, and the like." That's exactly what we get in the final episode of Sophocles' play, episode 6. At the beginning of the episode, a messenger tells the chorus, line 1366, "The queen is dead." The messenger relates the terrible things, line 1361, the terrible things that have occurred within the palace. And now we turn to this long speech by the messenger, one of the greatest speeches in all of Greek drama, and I think all of theater. That speech begins in our text at line 1371. 1371. So read along with me. "Once she'd broken in through the gate, dashing past us, frantic, whipped to fury, ripping her hair out with both hands. Straight to her rooms she rushed, finding herself across the bridal bed, doors slamming behind her. Once inside, she wailed for Laius, dead so long, remembering how she bore his child long ago, the life that rose up to destroy him, leaving its mother to mother living creatures with the very son she'd borne. Oh, how she wept, mourning the marriage bed where she let loose that double brood, monsters, husband by her husband, children by her child. And then but how she died is more than I can say. Suddenly, Oedipus burst in, screaming. He stunned us so we couldn't watch her agony to the end. Our eyes were fixed on him, circling like a maddened beast, stalking here or there, crying out to us, "Give him a sword." His wife, no wife. His mother, where can he find the Mother Earth that cropped 2 crops at once, himself and all his children? He was raging. One of the dark powers pointed the way. None of us mortals crowding around him, no, with a great shattering cry, someone, something, leading him on. He hurled at the twin doors, and bending the bolts back out of their sockets, crashed through the chamber. And there we saw the woman hanging by the neck, cradling high in a woven noose, spinning, swinging back and forth. And when he saw her, giving a low, wrenching sob that broke our hearts, slipping the halter from her throat, he eased her down. In a slow embrace, he laid her down, poor thing. Then, what came next? What horror we beheld! He rips off her brooches, the long gold pins holding her robes, and lifting them high, looking straight up in the points, he digs them down the sockets of his eyes, crying, "You'll see no more the pain I suffered, all the pain I caused. Too long you looked on the ones you never should have seen, blind to the ones you longed to see, to know, blind from this hour on, blind in the darkness, blind." His voice like a dirge, rising over and over, raising the pins, raking them down his eyes. And at each stroke blood spurts from the roots, splashing his beard, a swirl of it, nerve and clots, black hail of blood gushing down. Lines 1371 to 1416. So as in the works of Aeschylus, the violence is described, not shown, in Sophocles' play. And the metaphorical blindness from which Oedipus suffered is, in this scene, made literal. The prophecy of the blind seer Tiresias comes true. When the blinded Oedipus takes the stage, the chorus, which had once lionized their leader, line 1444, now shudders at the sight of their king. It is at this point in the play, I think, that Sophocles gives us some of his most compelling poetry, poetry I would call Aeschylean, influenced by the works of Aeschylus. And an example being lines 1452 to 1458. Let's look at this speech by Oedipus. He exclaims, "Dark horror of darkness, my darkness drowning, swirling around me, crashing wave on wave, unspeakable, irresistible, headwind, fatal harbor. Oh, again the misery all at once, over and over the stabbing daggers, stab of memory, raking me insane." There's an echo, too, here of Oedipus's first speech in the play. If you go back to the very beginning of the play, when Oedipus is addressing the priests, lines 7 to 9, Oedipus says the following: "Here I am myself. You all know me. The world knows my fame. I am Oedipus." Now, in episode 6, at line 1494, Oedipus laments, "Now loathed by the gods, son of the mother I defiled, coupling in my father's bed, spawning lives in the loins that spawned my wretched life. What grief can crown this grief? It's mine alone, my destiny. I am Oedipus." In answer to the chorus's question of why he didn't choose suicide, as Jocasta did, Oedipus snaps back at line 1501. "What I did was best, don't lecture me, no more advice. With mine eyes, how could I look my father in the eyes when I go down to death, or mother so abused? I have done such things to the 2 of them, crimes too huge for hanging." So he seems to be saying that death is too good for him, nor can he bear the thought of facing his parents in the afterlife, in the underworld, Hades. As the play ends, Oedipus goes into voluntary exile, which presumably ends the plague that has been visited upon Thebes by the gods. Oedipus says he will live out his remaining days on Mount Cithron, the very place to which he was sent to his death when only an infant. He asks that Jocasta be buried. He's most concerned, however, about his two daughters, Ismene and Antigone, who are led out on the stage, though they are not given any speeches. Confronted with his young daughters, he reflects on all they will lose out on as a result of his disgrace. They'll lose out on marriage, motherhood. They were born princesses, princesses of thieves who had these great lives ahead of them. And now those lives are gone. Line 1633, Oedipus says to his daughters, "Home you'll come in tears, cut from the sight of it all, the brilliant rites unfinished." He begs Creon, who is at this point taken over Thebes, to be a father, line 1648, to be a father to his daughters. When Creon orders the children taken to the palace, Oedipus, in his final words in the play, breaks down. He breaks down, losing his composure. Lines 1676 to 1677. Again, Oedipus's final words in this play. He says, "No, don't take them away from me. Not now. No, no, no." It's a very human moment and one of the play's saddest moments. In 441 BCE, over a decade before he wrote Oedipus the King, Sophocles had written another play, a play about what happened to Antigone after her father's disgrace. And that's the play we'll be looking at next week. I've often said, and not everyone agrees with me on this, that whereas Oedipus the King is Sophocles' most popular play, it is really the purest, most distinct Greek tragedy that we have, in the sense that it incorporates all the major elements that we associate with the genre. It's Antigone, written also by Sophocles nearly a decade earlier, that is the greater play, and maybe the greatest play of the surviving Greek tragedies. Well, I will let you work on Antigone over the course of the week and give a lecture on it at the end of the week. But before we leave Oedipus the King, I want to say a few things about, first, the dramatic irony in this play, as well as the enduring popularity of the play. So first, the dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is one of the main storytelling devices that is present in Sophocles' Oedipus the King. Dramatic irony involves a situation in a play in which the audience shares with the author knowledge of present or future circumstances of which a character is ignorant. In that situation, the character unknowingly acts in a way grossly inappropriate to the actual circumstance, or says something that anticipates the actual outcome, but not at all in the way that the character intends. That's what dramatic irony is. And for a few examples of dramatic irony, let's go back to episode 2 of this play. In episode 2, at the beginning of the episode, Oedipus addresses the people of Thebes as he declares his intention to undertake the mission to find the murderer of King Laius and thereby end the plague visited upon his city. So let's turn to line 280. So this is line 280, episode 2 of Oedipus the King. Oedipus says the following: Now my curse on the murderer of King Laius, whoever he is, a lone man unknown in his crime, or one among many, let that man drag out his life in agony, step by painful step. I curse myself as well, if by any chance he proves to be an intimate of our house. Here at my hearth, my home, with my full knowledge, may the curse I just called down on him strike me. So if I am related to this person and I do anything to protect this person, may I suffer the curse as well. He continues at line 301 in this address to the Theban people. So I will fight for him, King Laius, as if he were my father. Stop at nothing, search the world, to lay my hands on the man who shed his blood. Lines 280 to 303. So here, Oedipus pledges to hunt down the murderer of Laius, not realizing that he himself is the murderer he hunts. He pledges to fight for King Laius as if the old king had been his father, not realizing that Laius was indeed his father, the father he, Oedipus, has killed all those years ago. Examples of dramatic irony, one of the main storytelling devices that Sophocles employs in his play. So I want to close today by offering some thoughts on the popularity of this play. If we go back to its original production in 430 BCE at the city Dionysia in the Dionysus Theater, in the competition for Best Tragic Trilogy, uh, the play, the message of the play would certainly have resonated with the audience at the city Dionysia. In many ways, it's a religious message, right? And remember, the city Dionysia was ultimately a religious celebration honoring the gods and one god in particular, Dionysus. Well, the critic Fritz Graf writes about the religious message of Oedipus the King. He says the following: the play makes Sophocles' theology, system of religious beliefs, very clear. Human life is determined by the gods, even if it turns out terribly. To submit to the gods and to pity the victims is the better course. So the oracles of the gods are certainly vindicated at the end of this play. All the oracles turn out to be true, despite Jocasta's insistence midway through the play that the prophecies are all lies, and furthermore, that chance rules our lives. Oedipus the King, sometimes called Oedipus Rex, also called Oedipus Tyrannus, depending on who is doing the translation. Oedipus the King was the most performed classical play of the 20th century. And one must ask, why is that? Long after the West has given up belief in Zeus and Dionysus and Apollo and Hera and Athena and so forth, this play continues on, intriguing new generations of readers and playgoers. Well, some suggest that the play remains popular because it's so sensationalistic. It shocks and horrifies. It deals with one of the most basic human taboos, incest. Sigmund Freud, I'm sure most of you have heard of Sigmund Freud. Many of you probably studied Sigmund Freud in Psychology 101. Freud believed that sleeping with the opposite sex parent is an essential human fantasy. He was equally certain that jealousy toward the same-sex parent was prevalent in all of humankind, equally pervasive. He called this the Oedipal complex, after the myth of Oedipus. So if you ask Freud, why do people continue to have such a high regard for this play? Why do people seek it out, whether in texts or at the theater? Why are people so moved and enthralled by the story of Oedipus? According to Freud, it's all about the Oedipal complex. Well, I'm not sure if I agree with Sigmund Freud on that. I'll let you decide whether you agree. I do agree with Charles Siegel, who I quoted earlier. Charles Siegel wrote that playgoers and readers remain fascinated with Oedipus the King because of the questions it asks. Questions about destiny, predetermination, and foreknowledge. Here are the words of Charles Siegel, outlining the questions that Sophocles asked in this play. How much control do we have over the shape of our lives? How much of what happens to us is due to heredity, where parents are, to accidents, to sheer luck, good or bad luck, to personality, to the right or wrong decision at a particular crossroads in life, or to the myriad interactions among all of the above? Well, I'll leave you with this quotation from the play, which I think also speaks to why the play continues to be revisited as the centuries go by. The messenger reports the death of Jocasta in episode 6. This is at line 1420 to line 1423. He says to the assembled Theban audience, "Now in this day, wailing, madness and doom, death, disgrace, all the griefs in the world that you can name, all are theirs forever." The theirs being the royal house of Thebes. But notice that first line, now in this day. The play takes place over the course of a single day. And the fact that Sophocles deals with a single day, I think, makes the action of the play, Oedipus's fall from grace, all the more horrifying. The play seems to be reminding us that in a single day, your understanding of yourself and of your world can be irrevocably changed for the worse. You can end up like Oedipus, as the chorus puts it in the final stasimon, overwhelmed by a black sea of terror. All your plans, all your aspirations, blazing into oblivion. Well, with that, we will leave Oedipus the King, although I'm certainly interested in any questions or comments you have about the play. I hope you enjoyed the modern production of the tragedy that we watched earlier in the week. I rewatched it and enjoyed it immensely. And so, leaving Oedipus, we'll stay with Sophocles and move on to Antigone. So please read Antigone over the course of the week, and I will be discussing it by week's end.